Hey everybody, it's Carlton French. Welcome back to the Single Man Podcast. I am super excited to be sitting down today with Nujad Bolivar.
That's right. And I'm grateful to be on the Single Man Podcast.
So you're 32 and you're single.
I am, and happily so.
Why do you think you're still single?
You know, I think that religion is a sin. Who is this person that they call Jesus? Why do they talk about following him?
What's like the biggest difference, I guess you'd say? Okay, 10 years of actually having a relationship versus, I guess, the 22 years prior.
How do you define masculinity? How do you define femininity?
Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that. Being born in Colombia, coming to the U.S. at 6. What was that experience like?
We're not meant to experience our parents divorcing.
So 10 to 20, you didn't talk to them at all?
No.
If people are listening, they have a family relationship. What maybe would be a first step or piece of advice you could give someone like that?
The most important decision you'll ever make is whether you receive the free gift of salvation. The second most important one is who you marry. These generational curses are done, and they start today. They start while I'm single. I was living in a lot of darkness.
What does that mean?
Let's get real.
Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to take a second and thank you for watching the Single Man Podcast. What started as a vision in October 2023 has grown into something more than I ever imagined. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, I'm only creating 52 episodes, and my goal is to reach as many single men as possible through these real stories. YouTube tells me that only 10% of those who watch the podcast are subscribed. It would tremendously help the podcast reach more men if you would scan the QR code on the screen right now or click the only link in this episode's description and subscribe on YouTube. Through the link, you can also join our email list, follow us on social media, or even donate so we can keep making an impact in single men's lives. My commitment to you is to use 100% of anything donated to continue improving the quality of the podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, let's roll the episode. Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey everybody, it's Carlton French. Welcome back to the Single Man Podcast. I am super excited to be sitting down today with Nujad Bolivar.
That's right.
Nujad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you here. I am really encouraged by your story and the way that I've gotten to know you through our church here in Atlanta the last year or so. And I still remember the first time that we met, actually. It was after a young adult night at Passion City Church earlier this year. And you were like super respectful. It was like, oh my gosh, like I was just listening to your podcast earlier. Like I'd love to like talk to you more about that. And I was like, yeah, let's just talk right now.
Yeah.
So I was like, we ended up talking for like, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour that night. And so I was like, oh yeah, we got to have Nujad come on. And then saw you recently at church again. I was like, yeah, let's make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's close the deal. Let's do this thing.
Yeah. So super excited. And then as I've gotten to learn more about your story, it seems like really powerful how God's worked in your life and how you're 32 now, came to faith around 21, 22 when you were in college, or really like understanding what faith was raised in church, actually born in Colombia.
That's right.
In South America.
Yeah.
And then moved to the U.S. when you were 6 with your mom and dad. And you now live on the west side in Atlanta. And you work in product management.
That's right.
Here in Atlanta. And you're really passionate about spike ball, which is like a great hobby. I've been really into pickleball myself.
Yeah, I hear everyone. The craze is real. The craze is real with pickleball. So much so that I'm kind of getting into it now too.
But I like how you're staying, consistent with spike ball. I feel like spike ball was like the thing before pickleball.
Yeah. I feel like I'm an ambassador for the sport.
Yeah,
for sure.
I love it.
But true spike ballers would be like, who is this guy? No.
And you also are really involved at our church, Passion City Church here in Atlanta. You actually coach with our kids ministry at the church, which is like kindergarten through fifth graders.
That's right.
So coaching means like you lead the leaders of the kids, right? So you like help them with what they're trying to teach the kids and things like that.
Right. I'm there for them outside of the Sundays. So I meet with them and just have those special one-on-one moments. And then I also get to attend the moments where they're leading. I'm present, I'm observing, and I just help make sure that we're all sharing a unified voice and approach to some of these things. Some of us they're younger than me. I started Passion Kids 5 years ago.
Wow.
And you're telling me that I got to lead somebody's kid, disciple them. That's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And so having a coach present in your tent sometimes can be calming. And other times it's just a moment for growth. Like, hey, what if we try this? Just a quick anecdote there. There's this gentleman who's a dad.
Yeah.
And you can tell the experience he has with kids because he's a dad.
Right.
And he was leading this moment where at the beginning of tent time, he had all the kids sit down and he's like, all right, I need you all to say your name and tell me your favorite flavor of ice cream. For whatever reason, that stuck with me. I was like, look at that. It may seem silly. It may seem obvious. But what he's doing is he's getting them all to engage. He's getting all of them to know one another, not just himself, and address them by name. And if we've had any amount of journey with God, we know that names matter in his story. He changes names, Peter.
Yeah.
Saul to Paul.
Right.
And so, I thought that was great. And so I get to do that. I saw that moment and I made sure that my other tent leaders
Can do the same
thing and just share that story just like I did with you.
Wow, that's awesome. So how many kids, I guess, like kindergarten through fifth grade are you like overseeing, I guess, on a typical Sunday?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Passion Kids in Cumberland in particular has exploded.
Yeah.
We have the family center, right? And I just feel like it's like a focus of the Cumberland campus.
Yeah.
We have on any given Sunday close to 100, 110 children.
Wow.
So
Okay.
I'd imagine let's just cut that in half,
Yeah.
50, 60 could be boys.
So leading like 50 boys, that age range, so to speak, or
So to speak,
indirectly.
yeah.
And then you also lead with our young adult ministry at the church.
I do.
Which is 18 to 25 year olds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know how you have time to like do anything. You're just leading all these things. And I was like, blown away that I don't know. How do you even think about managing your time with all these different leadership things?
I don't necessarily stop to think about it, but I do know that I have to be intentional. I live off of a calendar. Because that's been probably one of the biggest changes I've had since continuing with the Lord, walking with the Lord, of, hey, I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to follow up with you. Like, hey, let's get that coffee. And it's not just like what we used to do with old high school friends. Like, oh, we should totally hang out.
Yeah.
But not. Right. So now it's, hey, let's hang out. Okay. What date do you have available? Are you available at this time?
Yeah.
And having certain patterns and rhythms with my life, I now understand, 7 a.m. coffees work well for me. Or I know the nights that I make available for others.
Okay.
So Wednesday nights work well for me because my Tuesdays and my Thursdays, I typically have something scheduled or something more, I don't know if systemic is the word.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Like a routine almost.
Routine. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I love it. Okay, cool. And so you're 32 and you're single.
I am.
Which is...
And happily so.
Happily so. I love it. And that's another reason that I was really excited to have you on, just to be able to share how you're navigating life as a 32-year-old single man, and navigating faith with it as well. So that's kind of the heart behind the podcast, is to reach single men who don't know Jesus by having conversations with men who do.
Yeah.
And so, super excited to jump into the conversation. Is there maybe like a high and a low this last week, so people can get to know you a little bit more before we jump into your story?
Yeah, absolutely. So a high this week would just be how this is a season where I feel like I'm getting to harvest. There's been a lot of investment, kind of like through what you helped introduce, all the investments in Passion Kids, in YA.
Yeah.
And so now, just yesterday, I had the chance to tell someone's story in baptism.
Yeah.
And the way that we do it with the YA, the Young Adults Ministry, you really meet them and you shepherd them through the importance and the understanding of that. And so what an incredible high. But it doesn't stop there. This Sunday, I'll be able to share the message at Passion Kids. And even that has a whole journey of being bold, seeking the Lord faithfully and being like, Lord, is this really something you're asking me to do? Because there's some wrestling. And now this is going to be my maybe 5th time getting to give the message at Passion Kids.
Wow. So what does that mean? Like preach?
Yeah, preach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What are you preaching on?
We're going through the Romans road.
Okay.
So we're talking about the fundamentals of salvation. For all have fallen short of the glory of God and have sinned, right? But God demonstrates his great love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, he died for us. So just going through those key things that show that Jesus is so different than any other worldly religion.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Would love to have you touch more on that. Any low first before we jump into
any low? I mean, work's going difficult right now. We're a startup. We're a scrappy startup.
Okay.
At least that's the adjective I like to use. And it can be a little daunting when, one person is wearing 17 different hats. And all of a sudden this new fire breaks out and you're having to figure out, all right, how am I going to handle the human element, the human condition of like, I know you have 1,000 things on your plate, but I also need you to do this.
Okay.
So that's stressful, but it's good. It's a good stress, I'd say.
Yeah. How big is your company? How many employees?
I don't even think we're 30. I think we're like 25 maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And in the office, there's only like maybe 10 in the office. And that's a stretch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Love it. So would love to have you jump into your story, being born in Colombia, coming to the U.S. at 6.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like? And at what point did you kind of come to know who Jesus was and what he had really done for you?
Yeah. So I was born in Colombia. I was born in a small city called Tunja. Most people are familiar with Bogota, the capital. I live 3 hours east of that.
Okay.
I was born to a loving mother, father. Lived there till I was 6 years old. However, we grow up thinking that our parents are a certain way, but we come to find out that, hey, they're just as human as you are, right? And my father actually had a relationship prior to being with my mother where he had 2 lovely children, my half-brother, my half-sister.
Yeah.
They separated, they divorced, and his wife moved to the United States and brought her 2 children here. And Angela when she came to the United States, she got diagnosed with leukemia. And
who's Angela?
Angela would have been my half-sister.
Okay. Oh, okay.
At this point, my dad would have remarried. I'd be in the story and all this. And she was put in the Make-A-Wish Foundation. She was put in the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and she asked to see her dad. And she knew me as well. There was a stint right before she moved, so she would have held me as a baby. There's all these little pictures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she asked for us, and yeah, total God thing. They approved the visas, 1990s Colombia, if you catch my drift. It was impossible, but God. But God. So got to come here to the United States, spent 1 more month with my sister before she passed. And her true last wish was when she was with my mom and her mom. And she was saying to them, I want Nujad to grow up here in the United States. I want him to have the opportunities that Colombia just can't afford. And my mom definitely took that to heart. And I think that's going to be so true of my story, where my mom has always been there for me. And I've always had a nobility towards her, even when I've been uglier,
Wow.
in those seasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how old were you? 6 when she kind of put in that request, and then y'all came to
Yeah.
US? Okay.
Yeah, I would have been 6 years old, 3 weeks later, all the red tape was cut through, and we were in a plane.
Wow.
Here in the United States.
And then you stayed here ever since?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So we ended up staying. That's how I got kindergarten through 5th grade. And then divorce was part of the story as well from there forward. Yeah.
So what was that? What happened exactly? What was that like?
Yeah. So that was difficult. We're not meant to experience our parents divorcing. That's not the design of this. And so it was difficult. And that's probably it was one of the most difficult things to see my dad and my mom grow apart. And because of my dad's character flaws, we all have them. I grew estranged with him. And that led to about 10 years or so of no communication.
How old were you when they divorced?
I would have been 10 years old. It was 5th grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 10 to 20, you didn't talk to him at all?
No.
Wow.
No, there was, early in the divorce, we would have sometimes where we'd catch up and grab dinner, or he'd come see me, but they grew more and more infrequent.
Yeah. Wow. So what was that experience like, going through that as a kind of teenager? Like hormones, make sure your dad's not around.
Difficult. And I probably made my life, not my life, but my mom's life miserable because she was dating. I now have a stepfather.
Oh, wow.
And I was awful. I was an awful teenager to her and to now my stepfather. And so that was difficult. I'm now actually an older brother because of that relationship and that marriage.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, yeah, just difficulties laced throughout. But one of the key things was the first thing that God did when I returned to him was reconciling me back to my dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was that like? I guess you grew up when you moved here to church, or in Colombia you were somewhat in church, or how did that evolve through that process?
Yeah. So my relationship with the Lord, I like to think that it began when I was in those elementary school years. There's a proverb that says, raise your child up in the faith, and when they grow up, they will soon not depart. And that's true. I was at Sunday school with my parents through, let's say, kindergarten through 4th grade. And there was a moment where I was at big church and I heard this call to salvation. And I just jumped up. I was like, yes, I want to go up. I want to say yes to this invitation. And my dad stopped me. He's like, Nujad, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what you're doing? I was like, yeah, Jesus, I want this. And he's like, okay, just remember this day. Remember this day. And I remember walking up to the altar. And at the time, I don't know if you remember this gel called God to be Glued. I would have this,
I don't think
the spikiest hair, and poor pastor had to just prick his hands.
Okay. I do know what that is. Okay. I thought it was like a church thing. Okay.
No, the gel, the hair gel.
The hair gel. Yeah.
He just puts his hand on me. And so
he's like wiping on his shirt after.
I don't know if it is the residue. It's more so just like I purposely try to get the spikiest hair I could when I was a little kid. So yeah, I would say that, the Lord, I received the Lord there, but in terms of my the whole arc of the story, I believed in him, but I wasn't following him. And that's the key difference. And that's what makes my story one similar to the prodigal son, where I just asked for my inheritance. I ran away, and it was in a low moment in college that I was brought to my knees. I can't continue like this. I was seeking all of the wrong things, everything that movie-like fraternity life brings. And so in that sense, I was so empty. I was living in a lot of darkness. Definitely living in a lot of darkness. But again,
what does that mean? Maybe like people that don't know Christianity or faith, they could relate to, maybe like single guys that are going through something like that.
Yeah, let's get real, right? Copious amounts of drinking. You know, that was definitely part of it. Seeking validation from women is part of it, and engaging in relationships that I should have never been a part of.
Sure.
And just living a promiscuous lifestyle. That was part of it.
Yeah.
And all these things, similar like to a small snowball rolling down a hill, grew. So if that was just the start of it, man, I could go on to very graphic stories of it being even worse.
Right.
Even worse. So yeah, that's where like I'm so grateful that I've always had a relationship with my mom for her to be able to intercede, to come in and be like, hey, come here.
So did she know what you were doing in college and like the drinking and promiscuous lifestyle, or not really? Or?
Yeah. So she's a Hispanic mother. She's been very involved, and I consider myself a mama's boy for sure. I love my mother to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was aware. She knew because I grew up in high school, straight A student, involved, did the clubs, not like clubbing, but like, you know, Key Club, Beta Club,
Yeah.
band.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so now her little baby is out Friday nights, Saturday nights, failing classes. There's all these clear indicators that, yeah, I'm not her little angel anymore.
Something's wrong. Yeah.
Something's wrong here.
Wow. So
Yeah.
she cared enough to do what? What did she?
Yeah. So she was very present in my life. And at this time, she had received an invitation to come to Mount Perrin. And so there's these two things where she's getting an invitation to go to this church called Mount Perrin.
Okay.
And her son is either slowly or quite rapidly deteriorating. You know, he's ruining his life. And her faith and obedience collided at my fraternity door. She would come very early on Sundays, knock on the door, and she'd be like, Nujad. She'd find me in, you know, unspeakable states. She'd like, go take a shower, get dressed.
Wow.
We're going to church. And again, I've always had a nobility towards her, a sort of obedience towards her. And that's probably cultural. And it's also a testament to just the love and nurturing of a kind, gracious mother. And so, yeah, sometimes, yeah, I'd put up a fight or something, but she would be persistent. Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, she'd bring me to Mount Perrin, and I started hearing things that we say that brought me to life. I really was dead. All those things that I was doing, seeking validation in places that I was never meant to.
Yeah.
Really became apparent. I was so blind to it. There was such a rhythm. It was such a habit of mine. Like I had no idea how truly dead I was.
Why do you think you got into that? Just like everyone was doing it kind of thing, or like your dad not being there? Or what was that? Yeah.
So what got me into those things would probably just be a lack of knowing my identity. And let me make this very real. So I remember being in high school and getting the chance to go back to Colombia for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And I go back, I'm enjoying like, oh, wow, I haven't been here in 15 years or something, you know, and it definitely had its impact.
Yeah.
And a family member or someone very near and dear said, you know, you're not Colombian anymore. Boom. And that shattered me because I don't know if anybody knows this, but there's this thing called racism.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And in the United States, I was never American enough, quote unquote. At least that was the feeling. And so it just it kind of taught me now in hindsight that, hey, ethnicity is not identity. Hey, where I'm from is a part of me, but that's not my identity. And so sure enough, I'm walking from senior year, freshman year of college, like I'm not American. Now I'm not Colombian.
Apparently
what
not
am
Colombian.
I?
Yeah. Wow.
And so fraternity life offers, quote unquote, offers that. Oh, their motto is be a true gentleman. And there's this whole creed that goes with it. And during rush week, they sell themselves as, hey, we're the most involved on campus. We have a 95% graduation rate.
Yeah.
All these things that sound great. You're like, yeah, absolutely. That's me. That's going to be my identity.
It's my identity now.
Oh, yeah. And then you get to see them live out their life too, where like they have the girlfriends, they have the cars, all of these things that someone's young, impressionable, like, yeah, I want that. I want that.
Wow. So then your mom is coming to the house, 21, 22. You're going to check out church.
Yeah.
But you had been when you were a kid as well, right?
I had been.
Okay.
I had been. Yeah.
So what was different about this time?
Well, I want to definitely mention that I never got to the point where I didn't believe in God.
Okay.
Like even in the midst of that, I would see friends talking about God, and something was always kind of poking at me, like, this friend of mine has something different. So I never got to the point where I would have called myself an atheist. Like, oh no, I would have even said I was Christian, which is probably the scariest part.
Yeah.
Because I believed in a God, but the name that I would refer to him would be the man upstairs. Oh, he's the man upstairs. Right. But that's no personal relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what was maybe that turning point where you're like, all right, starting to understand the relationship aspect or who Jesus was and what he actually did for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So here I am, Sunday after Sunday, my mom inviting me, coming out, and I started hearing things that sounded so different from how I grew up or what I'd heard growing up. One of those was that, this isn't about not going to hell. You can have a relationship. You can put a smile on the face of your creator. That alone sounded so different from what I grew up hearing, because when I was younger, it was all about hell, not going to hell, and all these things. And I don't think they de-emphasized it. They just talked about like, hey, it's not about that. You can live in a relationship with your creator today, and how that brings joy. And I was like, this is different. The key phrase that the pastor said, he started with, I think that religion is a sin. And that just completely tore like all these preconceived notions down. I was like, there's this guy who's a pastor on a pulpit saying that religion is a sin. This guy's crazy. I gotta listen. I gotta hear this out.
Wow.
But then that plus, again, you can put a smile on the face of your creator. It's like, all right, who is this person that they call Jesus? Why do they talk about following him? And I mean, I believe in him, but there's clearly something different about following versus believing.
Yeah.
So that was one of the first things. And there was this invitation to baptism. Growing up, my mom always made a big deal about it. So I'd never been baptized as a child. And somehow I knew whether through the messages, others living their faith out, that this was the first step that I needed to take to be baptized, to publicly declare that I had put my identity, my trust in Jesus. And so was I perfect? No, absolutely not. But it started something in me that was real.
Yeah.
That was real. And it shows itself in me taking bolder steps. Like I said, I enjoyed my fraternity life. There were some good things, sure. I think all things may have good things. But just like ahead, it's bad parts too.
Yeah.
But I started leaving the bad parts. Like, hey, I'm not going to go to these parties. I'm not going to go to these formals. And these like sacrifices started to add up. At first, it was so difficult, especially when one formal was in New Orleans. I've never been. I always wanted to go.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be included. And somehow the Lord just granted me that conviction to say, no, I'm not going to go. I know what happens at these things. I don't need this in my life. I'm something about me is different, and if I go, I'm just gonna like regress, or I'm gonna be the same way that I was, in the same state that I was.
Right. Wow. Okay. So, how old were you when you got baptized? Do you remember?
Yeah, this would have been in 2013. So
okay.
22.
22. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, so it's been like 10 years since walking with Jesus.
That's right. That's right.
What's like the biggest difference, I guess you'd say? Okay, 10 years of actually having a relationship versus, I guess, the 22 years prior, or like the years in college where you were, okay, trying to figure it out.
Whew. Can I start with everything? Everything about me is starting to be different. And I say it that way because I'm still on my journey. I still have so much growth. I'm aware. Every day that I follow the Lord, I'm more and more aware of how unworthy I am of that kind of love. Where before, I'm fine. I'm good. I can do this all on my own. I'm the man.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing is probably just a recognition of how much I need God, and how I can't do this on my own.
Yeah.
And how being in community, having real guy friends around you who are pursuing the same things makes all the difference. I do my best to surround myself with friends like you, right? Like you have an incredible reputation. Your reputation precedes you, and I know some of your friends as well, and I know how you lead your life. And so surrounding myself with other men that are men of purpose, men of noble character, those things I would say are some of the biggest differentiators now. And some of the things that I'm pursuing, like the way I date, completely different. Completely different.
Yeah. Excited to jump into some dating questions with you.
Yeah. I'm just eager to jump in.
Okay, before we get into that though, let's say you could talk to yourself while you were in college, or the version of yourself where you were estranged from your dad. Like, what would you go back and tell that version of yourself?
Yeah, I don't even know for that particular question. I don't even know if I'd have to go back and tell him something, because I was hearing something.
Oh, wow.
So a quick story here would be, all right, I'm following the Lord. I'm no longer just believing, but again, following, and I'm getting involved in small group. I think that was one of the first difference makers, where it wasn't just this Sunday to Sunday Christianity. It's like, hey, there's people that read the Bible on a Tuesday. What is this? Campus ministry was part of my life and being involved in that. Okay, so at this time, this would have been fast forwarding just a couple years. I got the chance to go to Pasadena for the first ever college football playoffs.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And part of my essence is always wanting to be different, but fitting in. What that looks like sometimes is people love a certain brand. Like I'll wear the same style, but a different brand. Right?
Okay.
Fitting in, but being different. At that time, it was SEC football.
Yeah.
SEC football.
Especially being in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, all right, if they love their football, I want to get into football too. I never really knew about that sport. And at the time, it was the Oregon Ducks. Oregon Ducks.
I'm going to pull for Oregon.
Yeah, they're
nice.
doing. And so one of the things that they represented was innovation, where everybody had these big players, big people push small people, that sort of thing. They were like, no, we want speed. They had the most plays under 13 seconds, the most touchdowns in under 60 seconds. And yes, sure, the uniforms. All that, I was like, I like this team. I'm following this team. So I get to go to Pasadena with my older brother, who at this time was living in Michigan. So we caught up for the new year. We got to see Oregon just completely destroy FSU. But we had real conversations. He had always maintained his relationship with our father. And he kind of just kept bringing up the subject lovingly. Like he really does have a mannerisms about himself that are gentle, that are kind. He's like, hey, have you talked to our dad? Have you thought about it? I'm like, the whole eye roll or the just dismissing it.
Yeah.
But get this, once we finished the trip, which was, again, incredible, I come back home and there's this ad in my car radio, and it's from Morgan & Morgan.
Yeah.
And the guy goes like this. He's like, hello, I'm John from Morgan & Morgan, and typically my services are for legal needs, but tonight my message is a little different. If you are in a fight with a loved one, even if it's their fault, I see far too often where people lose a loved one before getting to say sorry. So be the first to apologize, even if it's their fault. I'm John with Morgan & Morgan.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, I started. It was midnight. I was driving back to campus. I just started bawling, and I'm like, I'm going to call my dad. I'm going to call my dad. So my older brother had given me his number, and I just kind of sat on it. I was like, yeah, I'll look into this.
Wow.
And so I called him, and that was one of the first things, like not first big things I can remember that the Lord did in my life, was which was to reconcile me to my dad. And now we have a relationship. I can call him, I can see him, we go get lunches, things like that. And it's proven to be such a powerful part of my testimony that, look, here's this gentleman who has serious character flaws, who's imperfect. But man, look at how it's not about me, or how I've been forgiven for so much, how I have a source that's infinite in God, where he gives me all the strength, wisdom that I need to be able to go to my dad lovingly and genuinely and be like, I love you. I love you. I'm here for you. I want to help you. All these things.
So what was maybe the first step you did, or maybe people are listening, they have a family relationship, even now they're listening to this episode and they're like, this is like hitting a chord with me, or, oh, my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, like I really should reach out, or my grandparent or something like that. What maybe would be a first step or piece of advice you'd give someone like that that's going through it right now?
Yeah. For me, it was actually listening, because my mom knew that I was following the Lord, and she had been encouraging me. Hey, I think you should connect with your dad. I think you should connect with your dad. And then I'm in Pasadena and I'm with my older brother. I think you should connect with our dad. And again, just dismissing it. And it took an ad on the radio, right, to listen. And so if we are walking with the Lord, he makes us incredible listeners, right? It's his small and still whisper.
Yeah.
That and how he speaks to us. Sure, he can also communicate through painful times as well. But I would recommend that you don't let it get to that. And so the Lord is always speaking. It's whether or not we're listening.
Yeah. And just picking up the phone and giving a call or something like that is a good first step.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was shaking, but I just kind of did it in faith. I don't know what this man is going to say. He probably has every right to be mad at me too, because the road goes both ways. But I just kind of knew that I wanted to approach him with love and with the intention of forgiving him. And not necessarily making it like, I forgive you, I'm so good. It's like, no. Within my heart, I want to release whatever I'm holding on to.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That's so similar in a way. I wasn't like estranged from my dad, but I didn't have a really strong relationship with my dad 3 years ago when I came to faith. And, we would talk about like sports and finances and business, but like nothing real. Like I didn't really know him. And that's something that God was putting it on my heart. I feel like back in 2021, after I came to faith, was like, you need to sit down with your dad and talk to him about life and like how you've been living and your story, and then learn his story. And so same kind of thing. I like picked up the phone and I gave him a call, and was just like, hey, can you come to Atlanta? Like, I'd like to sit down and like, let's talk,
He lives out of state?
He lives 30 minutes south of Atlanta.
Okay.
So not too far away. But he was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, he came and we like had looking back, it was like a really restorative conversation about how I had been living and, how he had raised us and some difficulties that we had, and just kind of were able to air all of it out. And it was super, super healing. So yeah, if you're listening to the episode and you have, either of your parents that are still living or any of your siblings that are still living, you don't have a real relationship with them. You're estranged. Yeah, I would say like if they're living and it's a safe situation, like it's not dangerous, then it's worth reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely have the full capacity to do it. You definitely do. I definitely want to encourage you. Like, you can do it.
Yeah, that's great. So didn't even plan on touching on this at all, but yeah, I think that's really, really great. So just letting the Holy Spirit lead. So hard pivot now. Want to talk a little bit about dating. So this being the Single Man podcast, we talk to single men about how they're navigating faith and dating. So 32 now. I guess you had the phase in college where you were more promiscuous, and then you come to know Jesus. I guess how's dating different for you now that you're following Jesus? It's been 10 plus years or so now. Yeah.
It's been a journey to where I'm at now. If you take a snapshot in time right now, it's very intentional. right now the advice is a little different, where it's like, hey, I want to balance intentionality with intensity, where I want to dial down the intensity and some of the formulas and best practices so that I can be real. I want to be your friend.
Yeah.
I want to be your friend first and foremost. But I get to do that now because I have so many other brothers in the faith who care about me, who are transparently aware of what I do. And I can confidently say there are principles in my life that I've forged, right? They're not just like, oh, I kind of read it once and I practiced it. Like, no, these things have been practiced through many failed dates, many, unsuccessful relationships. I'm still single.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, dialing down that intensity, dialing up and continuing in the intentionality. That's one of the principles. Shout out J-Maw. He's helped me lead with intentionality. We've learned this from JP. He's an incredible resource. Jonathan Pokluda from The Porch, talking about men get this chance to give the gift of clarity, and that's something you can be intentional about. There's this one story where I'm not feeling the date, this, that, and the other, and he then challenges me. You started it with clarity. Now end it with clarity, and do so kindly, do so lovingly, but don't ghost. So I think that's one of those highlighted stories to be like, that's different.
Yeah,
that's different.
Yeah, or before you would have been like, oh, just don't text back, or I'll see you around.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All sorts of things, and even what I was pursuing, like what I was pursuing then was either just companionship, to say I had a friend and to get all the benefits of like, ooh, I get companionship and cuddles, what have you. But now I'm like, no, I believe that God put in my heart that I want to be a husband. And I say that boldly. I say that with conviction. Like, I want to be I want to be two things. I want to be a faithful husband and a present father. I think those two things are things that I would be able to write in my story as redemptive, where many others may not have seen that. In my family line, that hasn't really been seen. Divorce is far too prevalent.
Yeah.
I hope to be a redemptive part of that story, where I get to say, hey, I am a new creation. These generational curses are done. And they start today. They start while I'm single.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Really good. So 10 years of actually being a Christian and navigating dating. It sounds like even that you've matured in those 10 years as well. Like you said, like ramping up the intentionality, ramping down the intensity.
That's current. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you used to do it like the other way? It was like intense right at the beginning, like, oh, first date, I gotta know if this is my wife kind of thing, or why is that like how you're currently thinking about it?
Yeah. So I think it's a whole arc. So at the beginning of, hey, I'm following this man named Jesus, and I know that Christian dating looks different. So I was like, hey, sex is not going to be part of it. Okay.
Right.
But then we read in God's word that he says, take off his grave clothes, meaning like when you're buried, they embalm you, they dress you up nicely, you have a coat on, all these things. Likewise, when I died to my former self, I still had these patterns that I needed to unlearn, like making room, making space for temptation. Right. I think that was part of it. Like, oh, I'm Christian, I'm dating well, but I would make all of these subtle ways of leaving temptation be present. I wasn't intentional about it.
Like boundaries or
boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know how to do that.
Right.
And it showed in early relationships where I was like, I still, like if you were to look at my relationship then versus when I wasn't Christian, what would be the difference? Right. It's like, so it's like, oh, well, I'm not having sex, quote unquote. It's like, no, you are. Right. Anything that's that intimate should be reserved for my marriage.
Wow.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so again, taking off that grave clothes, unlearning these things that I used to do. So that's where like, all right, there's principles that I'm going to be learning here.
Yeah.
And then after that, the journey kind of matured into, okay, what am I looking for? What am I looking for in a significant other? And part of that was, okay, I want her to be Christian. But even that, there's so much more than she says that she is a Christian. It looks a certain way. Like, what is she bearing fruit? Are your missions compatible?
Yeah.
Because if she's an incredible Christian and all these things, but she wants to be a traveling missionary and you want to have a family rooted where you're in the city that you're at, that's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be selfish to be like, no, it's going to be my way or the highway. No. I get to do that in the song and dance of dating. What do you think the Lord has put on your heart? What are you looking for? This is, and I have a more clear perspective on what I believe the Lord has put in my heart. And I get to communicate that in a forward, meaning like upfront kind of way.
Yeah.
And like, hey, if you don't think that this is for you, I understand that. And I've had, now my breakups kind of look like that. And they're so God honoring, because once we get to that part of the relationship, like, hey, this is kind of what I'm about. This is what I believe my mission is. Would you want to join me in that? Then, it's a different decision other than, I don't like the way this guy smells.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe if you're comfortable, you could share a little bit about that, like what that kind of conversation would be like. Okay, here's what I'm trying to get out of marriage, or here's what I feel like my mission or vision is for my life. You share that on dates and let women react to that, it sounds like.
Yeah. And there's that's also been a process of learning how to, again, dial down the intensity.
Yeah.
Where I still want to be intentional about bringing these up, especially now that I believe I've learned how to articulate it, how to express my heart. Where before I've had beliefs or perceptions, but I just didn't know how to express it, what I was really about.
Yeah.
So part of that, and I'm grateful to be on the Single Man podcast, is I would love to be a father. And I'd love to say that I have a son and I have a daughter. And part of that is understanding that I want to raise my son to be a man, and I want to raise my daughter to be a woman. And that's inherently different. And I'm not going to value my son more than my daughter. I fully believe that I would love them equally and unconditionally.
Yeah.
And yet there's going to be certain things that how I'm going to treat my son differently than I'm going to treat my daughter. And I've seen that in other Christian men that I respect and value, and other pastors and how they talk about that. And so that's something that allows me like a fun way. I don't know about fun, but in due time, if we ever start talking about kids, I kind of bring that up. I was like, hey, what do you believe are the differences between raising a boy, raising a girl?
Oh, interesting.
And it shows so much. Sometimes we think that it's politics, like, oh, where do you land on the political spectrum? But that doesn't really hit the heart of it. For me, it's it's kind of like, or how do you define masculinity? How do you define femininity? And that's been the journey for me. We're like, hey, masculinity isn't this, hey, can you go lift 1,000 pounds? Can you be this alpha chauvinistic? No, it's, are you responsible? Do you take ownership for your actions, and do you care about others in a way where you build? You use your strength to be sacrificial.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there's something really special about a man's shoulders that we're meant to carry. And when I read Ephesians 5 of husbands, love your wives, and then it goes on to say for wives to respect their husbands, I don't think that I'm not meant to respect my wife and that she's not meant to love me. Yeah. But I think it speaks to our sin nature, where men struggle to love. And that's something that I want to learn now. How do I love well? And using that to be part of the conversation with my significant other. Yeah. Or the person that I'm dating.
Yeah. Wow. Really good.
Yeah.
I'm super impressed. Like, why do you think you're still single? If you don't mind me asking. I'm like, wow, how are you still single?
I can say that every date I've been on has helped shape me into who I am. So in the most recent relationship that I was at, that one was a crucible. It was this testing of fire, because I could say I loved her. I told her to her face, I love you. And a key marker of that to blue check verify that I did. I'm now 32 and I have a financial planner and I sound like such an adult, blah, blah, blah. And I was talking to him in one of our quarterly meetings.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, I'm dating someone. I've told her that I love her. I'd like to save for a ring. And I want to save for a trip to Colombia so that she can meet my real family. As not that my family here isn't real, but it's extended. It's not by blood, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, you name it. They're really in Colombia.
Yeah.
So that was a marker. I had that phone call and I hung up. I was like, did I really just say that? Did I really just put a plan in action to save for a ring and to meet her, for her to meet my family in Colombia? And she was the first one and only girlfriend that has ever met my dad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. So
What happened?
well, this is the relationship that taught me so much about my mission and about the way that I hold on to these values. We had differences in how we the masculinity thing, the femininity thing.
Yeah.
There's these big church terms called complementarianism and egalitarianism.
Okay.
And prior to that relationship, didn't even know those words.
Yeah.
But I praise God that he took me through that and that it hurt the way it did so that I could remember it and really value it and treasure it. To be able to say, hey, I now know something about myself. I know how to talk about it. And hopefully I hold it with open hands enough to be like, hey, if you have a difference, that doesn't make you any less Christian. It just means that for what I'm seeking, I don't believe that to be compatible with my mission.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Man. How long ago was that? Like the breakup?
Let's see. Now it would have been over a year and a half.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And there's been other dates since then, but nothing is serious.
Sure. Wow. Man, thanks for being vulnerable and sharing that.
No, thank you for asking.
Yeah. Hopefully that encourages single men that are listening that it's okay to put yourself out there and ask the hard questions and like really try to dig down into, is this who this is like who I want to spend forever with.
Right.
So you got to ask the tough questions.
Yeah. That piece right there of you saying that this is going to be forever. I've heard somebody, or many people say the most important decision you'll ever make is whether you receive the free gift of salvation.
Yeah.
The second most important one is who you marry. And so knowing how important it's been that my life has been radically changed by the person of Jesus, I'm also now on that second question. I'm like, who am I going to marry?
Yeah.
And being older, being more mature, I get to be careful. I get to be guided and counseled as I seek to answer that question. Who will be my wife if I'm granted that? I'm not promised that. And I think that would be one of the messages that I want to get across in this podcast. It's not a promise. Being married is not a promise that we're given.
Yeah. Do you feel content? Like, okay, you're after the breakup, you've had some time to heal, I guess, and process through that. Like, do you feel content being single now?
I do. There is a contentment. I had a friend challenge me on that. Like, what does that look like? And it means like, I still have a clear longing to be a husband, to be a father. But I'm not forcing it per se. I have a hate relationship with with dating apps. I tried them in college, but they're not for me. I don't have anything against other guys or women using them, but they're not for me.
Okay.
And for me, it would be forcing it to use those apps. And so it's helped me become more intentional about community. Yeah. It's helped me be more intentional about putting myself out there in person, IRL,
Yeah. That's great. Wow. Okay. Amazing, Nujad. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This has really encouraged me even. So
yeah,
I'm sure it's going to be encouraging to all the listeners. All right. Last question. We'll kind of wrap things up with this. Let's say there's specifically single men that are still listening to the episode that don't currently know Jesus. What's the one thing you'd want to leave them with, to take away from your story, this conversation? Okay, write this down on their phone, take a note, heading into the weekend.
Yeah. So to men that don't know Jesus, I would love to be able to speak to them where they're at. That's one of the greatest things about the person of Jesus. My story is the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
Where, yes, when I was 8 years old, I received Jesus. I was like, I believe in him. But 21, 22 years old, I followed him. And the prodigal son story has this interesting part where the younger brother leaves to a far off country and he just wastes his life. And it's at that pit of despair where he kind of comes to his senses, and he's disgusting. He's absolutely disgusting. And
It's
he's
like
about
eating food with the pigs and the, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has this realization. He's like, man, even my father's servants have food enough to spare. And so he comes up with this plan where he says, I'm going to go to my father and I'm going to say that I've sinned against you and I've sinned against heaven. I am not worthy. So those two things. He has this humble realization of what he's done. And he's going to tell him, I'm not worthy to be your son. Make me like one of your servants. And he says, while he was a long way off. So it's this idea of him just change direction. And his father sees him. His father sees him and runs towards him. That would be how I would want to meet someone that doesn't know Christ.
That's good, yeah.
Whereas like, hey, the one thing you just need to realize is how desperate you are. Like sometimes it does take a rock bottom. For me, it took a rock bottom.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
For that. And once you have that humble realization, the Lord can do the work. While he was a long way off, his father ran towards him. And here's the interesting part. Some things just colliding. One, he runs to him in the current mess that he's in. He didn't have to clean himself up. He's not, let me stop at this motel right quick and get a shower. It's like, no. In that muck, in that mire, in that disgustingness, he hugged him. He kissed him.
Yeah, wow.
He clothed him. And so I was like, hey, don't be someone you're not. Be who you are right now, but with the humility, the recognition of the lowness that you're in. And then he starts with his plan. He says to him, Father, I've sinned against you and against heaven. And then the dad just turns around and he says, hey, come, let's celebrate. Get the fattened calf, all these things.
Yeah.
He never got to the second sentence, which was going to be, I'm not worthy to be your son. Make me like one of your servants. Right? No, he's like, immediately the father cut him off and is like, hey, my son is found. My son is alive. So just know that your identity is going to be found in him, and he's still going to call you son. He's going to call you son. You're not going to be this servant.
Yeah. Wow. Just taking a small step toward God, like taking the small turn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's that recognition, like, man, I am in a low place.
Yeah. That's literally what I did when 3+ years ago, when I was trying to figure out faith. I was at a low point, and I was like, God, if you're real, just help me to see today, you know? So yeah, if that's you're a single man listening to the conversation still, or you got sent this episode by somebody, just start there. You know, just take a small step, humble yourself. God, I don't know if you're real. Help me to see in some way today. Take a small turn, and you'll see God will run toward you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really good, Nujad. Thanks so much, man.
No, thank you, Carlton.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.
This episode. If it encouraged you, and you're listening on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, would love for you to leave a comment below with your favorite takeaway from the episode. Nujad and I will be reading them and responding. And would love for you to share it with a friend too, if you think Nujad's story might resonate with somebody, or maybe someone needs to reconcile with a family member, or maybe you do yourself and Nujad's story resonates with you. We'd love to hear that. So thanks so much for tuning in this week to the Single Man Podcast. This has been Carlton French. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man Podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific with a new episode. Until then, Check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.